Okay, so a couple of announcements. First of all, the homework assignment for those of you who are not able to make the hackathon was posted on Slack yesterday, so it's a pretty good size paper to write. Uh, huh? Well, it's supposed to be 12 hours worth of work, right? To equate to 12 hours of a hackathon. So, and that's due by email to me by midnight on Monday. So you can start it whenever you want. Um, Otherwise, if you are doing the hackathon, all of you should have gotten an email for what team you're on. And hopefully you're in contact with your team lead, although based on the poll I took this morning, that's unlikely. So if you haven't heard from your team, I would go ahead and reach out by email to your who was listed as your team lead, so you guys can start brainstorming project ideas for the hackathon. Some things to kick around, or maybe, I mean, we don't want everybody doing this, and maybe it might be kind of boring, but like, a virtual reality tour of the computer science department, or tour of some building, or create some game. I mentioned, had in a class yesterday, maybe like laser tag or something in VR. If you watch the boot camp video from Monday night, you'll see that I introduced this thing called VRTK that has a lot of stuff built into it. So you probably could do almost like a laser tag thing with the laser pointer in there, and have created kind of a 3D environment for you to move around in, maybe with teleportation or something. And you would have enemies that would be out to try to get you. And if you're in a group and you need kind of artificial intelligence-based enemies, I think most of the team leads have done this before, but the thing you're looking for is something called a nav mesh agent, and I'll be at the hackathon, so I can help you implement that. It's not very hard. Unity does like all the work for you, so you can actually have your, the opponents for in your laser tag game. If you went went that route or something, you could have them trying to get you, padding around all the different obstacles and the things, so you'd have to run away from them and hide behind stuff and things like that to try not to get hit. But things like that. Just kind of start brainstorming with your team for the for the hackathon. A couple of other announcements. I mentioned this in my class this morning, so the couple of you who are in there getting repeats. But some interesting opportunities. Here, I'll put the flyer up here first. So this event is actually tomorrow night. It was announced to CUW all, but you maybe didn't reach it. There's this thing called, or read it. This is called CU Launch. I think it came out maybe last week when they announced it. So this is kind of an entrepreneurial type of event hosted by the business school here at Concordia. And so every year they have this competition, and it's kind of a way for budding entrepreneurs to come and who have an idea. Or who are interested in participating in an idea to kind of learn about creating business models and putting together a pitch and actually creating a real product. And this is the first part of it. So this is kind of the incubator. So it's a business model and pitch boot camp. So this is actually tomorrow from 4 to 10 p.m. So if you are interested in doing something like this, it would be nice if you could attend this event, but you can actually be part of CU Launch even if you have to miss this event or miss a good portion of the event. But you should reach out to me today so we can discuss ideas if you want me to work with you on this or be your mentor or whatever it is. But in any case, almost always they give. I mean, last year I think the top prize for the spring semester one, which is the one that this one flows into, was $5,000, and pretty much all the losing teams got $1,000. As like startup money to create some project. So worst case, it's a good learning experience and something you can put on your resume, something like that. You'd actually be part of a company because we'll create an LLC out of it and stuff like that. Best case, it turns into a real app. You might even take whatever you make at the hackathon and use that as your starting point for this type of thing. So this is something you're interested in getting involved with, regardless of whether you have an app idea or not. I have plenty of ideas we can maybe go and pitch, and I'm one of the mentors for the whole event. So I'll be there for a good portion of tomorrow, but I can also work with individual teams. So if you are interested in being part of this in one way or another, whether you can come to tomorrow or not, email me as soon as possible today so we can start talking about it. That way I can mention it to Dr. Dan Sem, he's the Dean of the Business School, for tomorrow, that you want to participate in it and get some experience and that kind of stuff. And the reason I kind of bring this up is just to kind of show you where these things can go. So we had a project that actually started with CU Launch a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I guess. And it was working through the pharmacy school. So the two kind of faculty members who were part of this originally was Dr. Sharon Chappie, who's the Dean of Nursing, and then Dr. Christian Albano, who is a professor in the pharmacy school, working with one of their third-year pharmacy students who now graduated, and he's up in Alaska. He's a pharmacist in Alaska. But they kept with it. So they won the CU launch thing, got $5,000 from that, and kept building the app. They actually spent almost $60,000 in their own money to build this real actual application for syncing prescriptions, is kind of the high level idea of what it is. And then just last night, so I'm part of this team now, and just last night we were in the finals of the CMMA pitch event at the Hilton downtown, and we got first place in it and won $22,000. So these little things can turn into bigger things, and you could be part of it. And so this is kind of falls into that category of make your education is what you make of it. So most of what you're going to learn in school isn't necessarily what you learn in the classroom. So take advantage of some of these extra opportunities. So do email me today if you are interested in being part of that. Let's see, any other announcements? Any questions about CU launch thing that I can cover right now? Otherwise, I'll look for emails later on today. Okay. All right, so let's look then at the homework assignment. One other thing, I mentioned it this morning too, but this is related to the hackathon. At the event last night, there was they had like a kind of a poster session beforehand where they had a bunch of vendors there showing things they're working on. And there was this one group there, and I don't know tons and tons about what they're actually working on. It's some kind of therapy. I think they're pretty early on in it, but kind of a therapy thing, more targeted towards older people who kind of need to get their hand-eye coordination back after an injury or something like that. And they're doing it with virtual reality stuff. So they had an Oculus Rift there, and they had kind of a scenario, something similar to what we might build at the hackathon. But instead of using the hand controls, like we'll probably be using at the hackathon, they're using this thing called Leap Motion. How many of you have ever heard of Leap Motion? So it's actually pretty neat. So Leap Motion was originally kind of created as an input device for your normal computer. So it's this little tiny sensor thing, and you put it on the desk, it hooks into your computer through USB, and it allows you to give gesture, like air gestures and stuff with your hands, because that's how you hit the back button in your browser or something like that. You swipe it or something. So more, kitschy than anything else. But, punchline is that was kind of the beginning part for that technology. We had a student in senior seminar last year work with that for, she created an application in Unity for helping kids learn math, like do math problems. Be fun for them where they can reach out and kind of, touch a number to, give the answer or something like that. And it seemed a little bit quirky, like it didn't, wasn't as accurate as I wanted it to be. Well, apparently the technology has come pretty far, because this group last night, they instead of using the hand controls for the Rift, they actually had the Leap Motion attached to the headset, and instead of having your hand controls in VR, you had your actual hands in VR from the Leap Motion. And it was shockingly accurate. You were grabbing things, you could push stuff with just an individual finger, and pretty neat. So I went ahead and I ordered one, and we actually should have it tomorrow afternoon sometime. So I'll bring it to the hackathon, and we'll be able to demo that, and I'll bring it up in some VR project or something like that during the 12 hours, and that should be kind of a neat thing. The other thing that we are getting, we don't have it yet, but we won't have it for the hackathon. But we're getting a mobile EEG device where it's a headset thing you put on. It has like 14 input sensors, and we're going to work with it in conjunction with machine learning. So the idea is that you can control things with your mind. And kind of the software that it comes with, it has like a little remote control car or something like that built into the software where, you train it to, when you think go forward, the car goes forward. When you think go backwards, the car goes backwards, just as kind of a starting point. So then you can decide how complex your thoughts might get, right? And you can think about controlling your video games with just your mind, and then take that a step further. Maybe it's, controlling things in virtual reality or something like that with your mind, where you actually will move objects by thinking about the object you want to move, and then thinking about lifting it up in the air and that kind of stuff. Interesting at the very least, right? Who knows how, we don't know a whole lot about the brain, but interesting combination with machine learning type stuff. So that's something we'll be playing with in the department as well. So you might, as you're thinking about the CU launch thing, consider those two technologies. If you have an idea or something, maybe you just, one of those sounds exciting to you and you want to came to me and say, I'd like to do something with leap motion. Do you have any ideas that we can do for the CU launch thing? Because I think those are two things that would be neat for us to have projects related to at CU launch. So in any case, that's the idea there. But those are two kind of exciting things to look forward to play within the department. So another example of stuff that you can work on as a student with faculty members that we're not necessarily bringing into the classrooms. We're already bringing VR into the classroom now. We'll probably bring some of the leap motion stuff or the EEG stuff into the classroom next semester. But if you want to work on it prior to that, then talk to me. Okay, so let's see where we left off with this project last class. I know I kind of gave you a starting point, and I know we had two edit text, but did we just have one hooked up, something like that? And what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to read in from both edit texts. You're supposed to reverse the strings and then glue them together, output onto a label, right? Is that the deal? Okay. All right, so right now we have this thing. If I type in LOL and hit click me, it reads in from that LOL and writes out to that label, right? All right, so we need to add a second edit text. No, actually, for right now, why don't we take this one step at a time? Why don't we go ahead and write a reverse function? We've written that before, right? Take a string, reverse the string. So why don't we reverse the string and spit the reverse string out to our text view. So inside of our activity, remind me, what's an activity? Just the view, something we see on the screen. It's a screen in our application, right? So it's actually not a view. An activity would be a collection of views. A view group is a collection of views, and a view is something we see. But the activity, we can think of an activity as being a single screen in our application. Okay? So when this guy was created, we set the content view, and then we have this on change button press. So this is the guy linked to that button. And when we click the button, what did we do? We went ahead and asked this activity to find a specific view by ID. Which view? The view associated with our input ET. So if I click back over here, and I click on this edit text here, you see we name this guy input ET. So that's how MVC is gluing these two things together. All right, so let's go ahead and inside here, let's create we'll make it a private function because we're only going to need it internally here inside this activity. And it's going to return a string, and it's going to be called reverse. It'll take a string as a parameter. And this guy is going to just reverse whatever string is taken in. So we'll create a string maybe called answer, and this guy will start off as the empty string. Now we want to go ahead and start at we can go two routes here. We can start at the end of S and then work our way towards the front, building up a new string. Or we can start at the beginning of S, work our way towards the end, and build up our string in reverse by concatenating onto the front of our string each time. I like to go in reverse because we're thinking about going in reverse. So we're going to have a for loop that's going to start off at the end of the string. So we're going to say int I is equal to, now what's the last legal bucket in S? What's the position of the last legal bucket in S? S.length minus 1. Okay, so S.length minus 1, because strings are 0 indexed. So if a string has a length of 5, the legal buckets are 0 to 4. So length minus 1 gives us that 4. All right. So we'll start I off at S.length minus 1. We want to keep going as long as I is greater than or equal to 0, because the first legal bucket is 0. So we want to go from 4 to 3 to 2 to 1 to 0, including that 0. And then each time we want to decrement I by 1. So I will become 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, in an example where S's length is 5. Each time through, we want to take answer and say answer is equal to answer concatenated with, we want the current character in S, so it's S.char at I. So we'll walk our string in reverse, take each character that we hit along the way and tack it onto the end of a string. So in the end, we should have, at the end of this for loop, answer should be our string in reverse, and we'll go ahead and return answer. Okay, so that's our reverse function. So now in our on change button press, let's go ahead and test that. So rather than, so let's just do, we'll create a string called reverse, and this guy will be equal to this dot reverse, and we'll pass it the string that we want to reverse, and this will be the string that we got from our edit text. And then we'll set the text equal to reverse. Now, why did I call my reverse function by saying this dot reverse? Why was that the correct way to call the reverse function? This is that same thing I'm trying to drill into you about how do you detect instance methods versus class methods when you're defining them? How do you detect instance method? Well, how do you detect instance methods versus class methods when you're calling them? How do you call instance methods? How do you call class methods? So reverse in this case must be what kind of method? You say class method? All right, tell me why you're wrong. I'm calling it in the same class, but I'm not calling it with the class name. What am I calling it with? Yeah, okay. What is this? What is this guy? It does refer to a class, but let's be more specific. What is the this keyword? Yeah, this is how a class refers to itself from within itself. It is the instance of the class that we're currently in. So this is an instance of this class. This is an instance of main activity, not main. So if it was a class method, I would say main activity dot. An instance method, I would need an instance of main activity to call it. So I would say this dot because this is an instance of main activity. When we look at this method, how do we know that this guy is an instance method? No static. So since we didn't put static out front, that means we defined it to be used as an instance method. Therefore, when we go and call it, we must call it using an instance of the class in which it was defined. Right there, this dot reverse. Make sense? Like I said, I'm going to keep bringing it up until it's like a boring answer. We just can't give... It will not break it if you omit this. That's correct. Because we are in a context. So this, because this is an instance method. That's deeper than that. This guy is an instance method, correct? How do you know he's an instance method? No static. Okay, so since this method did not have static in front, he is an instance method. So that means inside of this method, we are in an instance what's called context. So that means anything we put in here that we haven't explicitly, that isn't a local variable or we haven't explicitly said otherwise, will have a presumed this dot in front of it. Make sense? I like putting the this dot in front of it, and it actually is faster to put the this dot in front of it. It also will do command completion for you. Yeah, so there's advantages to it. But the point is that you want to understand why it doesn't break. Yeah, it's not the type thing of, oh, well, isn't this the same thing as taking it out? It functionally is the same thing, but there's a reason why it's the same thing. And until you're 100% confident in understanding why it's the same thing, always call an instance method using an instance of the class. There should always be something in front of it. So as soon as you're 100% confident that you can deviate from my rule of always putting an instance in front of it, always put an instance in front of it. You'll never be wrong. Okay? Okay, so let's go ahead and test this. So we'll go ahead and get the reverse of whatever was in our input ET, store it in this variable called reverse, and then we'll set our label equal to that reversed string. Just to make sure this guy's working, make sure our reverse function's working, then we'll go ahead and put our second edit text in. All right, so we'll type in hello, and there's hello in reverse. So reverse seems to be working. So now we need to go ahead and give ourselves a second edit text. Maybe we call this guy input ET2, something like that. So we could either go and find another edit text up here, or you can come down to this edit text, copy it. On a Mac, it's Command C. On a PC, it's Control C, and then paste it. On a Mac, it's Command V. On a PC, it's Control V. Or if you preferred, you could have just found another edit text up here. I'll just do it the other way too. So I'll delete this. You would have come up here to text, plain text. I'm just going to drop it underneath the edit text here, or the input ET. We're going to change this guy to input ET2. Input ET2. So that's going to be his name there, and we'll go ahead and we'll take the we'll set the type to just text. You actually didn't need to change that. The default would have been fine. But this drives what kind of keyboard shows up. So if you want to have just numbers, you would go down and pick one of the number thing, or if you want a time-based keyboard, whatever kind of information you want them to enter in is what it is. But we chose a plain text thing, so it's going to give you the default keyboard, which would have been fine. You didn't need to change it. We'll go ahead and set our a hint here. Enter something else, something like that. And then we'll change the default text that's in there. We'll just empty it out. That way our enter something else hint shows up. Now, if I want this guy to be centered, how do I do that other than the text alignment down here? Change its gravity, right? So I would go into view all properties, go down to gravity for this this guy, and make his gravity center. So that little edit text now has a gravitational pull that sucks everything to the center of it. So inside there, he has some hint text, and that hint text got sucked to the center. Okay? But as we saw, they gave us a little convenience thing in here where you could actually use text alignment to change that stuff. But gravity goes across the board for all views. Okay, so this guy's called input ET2. So what we want to do is we want to read in the string from this first one, which we're already doing. Now we want to read in the string from the second one, reverse both of them, concatenate them together, throw it into the text view. All right, so let's go back to our code. Let's go ahead and get our second text box. So we'll say edit text input ET2 is equal to the edit text version of this dot find view by ID, r.id dot input et2. Now remind me, what is the R class? Okay, tell me more about it than that. It is our resources, but give me as much information as you know about the R class. Because we didn't write it, did we? We've talked about it, right? We definitely talked about it. So the R class is automatically maintained for us, right? Android maintains this guy for us. There's actually a tool called Gradle that maintains this guy for us. So R is a class that exists inside of our project that we have access to, so it must be a public class, that keeps track of all the different layouts and identifiers that we have built. That way we have a convenient way of accessing them. I can say r.id.input et2, and this guy's going to ultimately boil down to some unique integer that uniquely identifies our input et2 box. But we don't have to remember that int. Instead, we can just use English-sounding variable names like this, and life is better. All right, so based on that, what kind of animal is ID here? R is a class. We just said that, right? Okay, this is a field. Yeah, so anything that comes after a class, so when we have a class name followed by a dot, this can be one of three things. Really, actually, in this particular case, it could be one of two things. What are the two things that could possibly be following a dot after a class name? Field is one. What's the other one? Well, a method, any kind of method. Actually, only a specific kind of method, and it would be a class method. But okay, so fields or methods. And then what's the third kind of member that classes have? Constructors. So all classes are made up of three things. They're made up of fields, constructors, and methods. Now, when would we find a constructor? What keyword would a constructor always follow? The new keyword. Okay, so why do we know that this guy is a field? You pointed out he's a field, and you're right. Why is he a field? How do you know? Yeah, perfect. That's a star for the day. Did you see my Slack post the other day? I got a kick out. Well, he's skipping class today. Must have shamed him. It was like the greatest answer ever until Charlie did it. Now that's the greatest answer. Parenthetical notation. What's up?
If anybody not in this class thought they have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, I mean, that's not like a made-up word.
Well, the context.
Yeah, yo, you mean when I put it on Slack?
Yeah, you see it. Parenthetical notation.
Yeah, that's true. You had to have been in class or watched the video to get the inside joke. Otherwise, it's like, why is he posting that, right? Yeah, that made my day, actually. The things we get excited about, right? Because I mean, we're nerds. It's a thing.
I have to look it up.
Oh, I got it. Well, but I mean, that's more acceptable. I mean, English isn't your first language, so it's. I mean, I think most of us have heard the phrase heard the word parenthetical before, right? It's like a weird word, not something you use commonly, but we kind of knew that it meant things with parentheses, something like that. Is that true? Do we not know that? Is that not common knowledge? Well, but the thing is, I can't tell if it was definitely common knowledge for me. And it's not because I have some gigantic, awesome vocabulary, but when I went to school, it seemed, I mean, there are new words today that weren't words when I was in, so I'll hear people use words that I'm not familiar with. Like I had some students a couple semesters ago have I guess it was a year ago, have some fun with me. Apparently there is a phrase that doesn't mean what I thought it meant. Well, I had never heard of it. That was Netflix and chill. Yeah, so somebody said it in class. I had no idea what that meant. And so, I'm like the oblivious old guy, I guess. So they taught me about some of the newfangled lingo. Is that do people say lingo? No lingo anymore? Who knows? I don't know. Whatever. Yeah, so you start, vocabulary it kind of goes over the ages. So I think parenthetical notation would have made a lot of sense to me when I was your age. But it's possible that people don't talk like that or something. I don't know. Okay. So in any case, we know that this guy must be a field because it doesn't have parentheses after it. It would be a method if it looked something like that. Had some parentheses. Okay. So must be a field. Specifically, must be a class field, right? Because we're calling it with a class name. How do we know that R is probably a class name other than the fact that I've told you it's a class name? That it's capitalized. Typically, naming convention is that class names are capitalized. Notice here, main activity, capitalized. It's not a rule. Java's not going to scream at you if you use class names that are lowercase, but general programming, naming conventions. This is not a Java-specific thing. This is across the board in all object-oriented languages. Typically, you name your classes with a capital letter, and typically you name your functions, methods, starting with a lowercase letter. Again, also not enforced. You can have your method names in all caps if you want. The language doesn't care, but this is more of naming convention. So to say that this guy is probably a class is as far as you can go based on seeing it there, because you're saying if they followed common naming convention, it's likely a class. Okay. So we have our two input texts. And then we have our label. I'm gonna go ahead and that's string reverse, and we'll say string reverse 2 is equal to this dot reverse input et2 dot get text. Now notice here when I just start typing get text that this guy actually returns something called an editable. All right, that's a type of, we know this is a class, right? It starts with a capital letter. All right, so it returns something that is of type editable. Okay, it doesn't return the class name itself. It returns something that is of type editable. Now, we don't necessarily know what editable is, other than the fact that editable is not a string. And we need a string to pass to our reverse function. So we're going to go ahead and get the get text from this, which gives us an editable, and then we'll call his toString to get the string version of that. Now I'm telling you that editable is effectively a string, so when we call toString, it's going to give us something that looks like a string to us, not that weird memory addressy thing. Okay, so that'll get us the string from input E2. We'll pass that to our reverse function, storing the result in reverse 2, and then we will concatenate reverse and reverse 2 onto each other. Make sense? So that should be the solution for the homework. Let's go ahead and run this guy. And we'll test it with a couple of inputs. So we'll put in hello there. We'll put in world here. We'll do click me. And there's our hello world with hello in reverse and world in reverse concatenated together. All right, questions about that one? Okay, so let me go ahead and commit the changes to this. So we'll go up to VCS. I'll say commit changes. VCS stands for version control. What does the S stand for? Version control source? Yeah, I don't know what, version control is for source code, but it doesn't sound right to me for the S. But the VC definitely stands for version control. It's already selected the files I've changed. It says, oh, I've made changes to main activity. I've made changes to activity main. I added my second edit text. Fine. So I'll just go ahead and under my commit message, I'll put solution to, what was this, homework 12? And then under commit, I'll do commit and push. This gives me that scream at me thing that our code analysis is not completed. Do you want to review it? Whatever, I'll just do commit. And then even though I said commit and push, it still wants me to hit the push button again. Poor design, I guess. So hit push, and it's going to upload its thing, and now the solution will be up on GitHub. So if you click the same link I'd given you for the homework assignment, you'll now have the updated version that has the solution in it. Okay, so now let's look at some other mechanics. So I'm actually going to create a brand new project. That way I can give you a new template. So I'll close this guy. We'll start a new Android Studio project. We're going to call this CSC250 homework 13 template, something like this. Okay, and we'll hit next, and we'll go ahead and just use the default for Android 4.03. Hit next. We'll choose empty activity. Hit next. Main activity, activity main. That's fine. We'll hit finish. Okay, so now let's go ahead and work on getting information, because a lot of times we have multiple screens in our applications, right? It's pretty common to have multiple screens in our applications. So let's get the logic in here to go from one screen to another screen. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and in our activity main, I'll go ahead and delete our hello world button, and I'm going to throw a new vertical linear layout in here because I just like working with those. Let's call it mostly laziness, but whatever. And then I'm just going to throw a button in here that will take me to a second page as a starting point. Okay. So I will go ahead and say, oh, where's my buttons? Under widgets, button. We'll throw that in my linear layout. And we'll put the text in here, go to page 2, something like that. All right, now we need to give ourselves a third button down should turn all the front lights off, if that helps. Did that help? So go to page 2, and I don't need access to this button programmatically, right? I want the button to be able to call a function, but I don't need access to the button as a programming element. So I can leave its ID as just a generic button. So don't waste your time renaming widgets on your screen that you don't actually need that MVC control over. You don't need to ask for on your programming side. All right, so now we're going to go back over and we're going to create our function that this button's on click can talk to, though. So go to main activity. Come in here, we'll create a public void on next page button pressed. You can name that guy whatever you want. I like to be pretty explicit when I program. Now what's actually kind of funny is many of you might look at this and think this is a little overboard, right? Okay, I've been programming for a long time. When I was starting to program, I would have agreed with you. Make your methods spell out what they do. It will make your life easier, because when you have to come back to a project after 6 months or something like that, you might kind of forget what this particular function does. And that's why I like to use this dot. That way I don't have to spell it all out. Make sense? Yeah. Make them explicit. You'll thank me later. This is the punchline. Because I would have been right with you years ago. You know, you have single letter variable names that mean nothing and stuff like that, and that code's like impossible to read. So trust me on this. All right, so this guy's going to take one parameter. It's going to be a view v, and the view, it has to take in that. Yeah, I couldn't get the, okay, yeah, I just hit alt return or option return, import class. Yeah, that's the way to do it, but that didn't work the other day. Well, no, I know it's how it's always been historically, but I was trying to do this in class the other day, and I couldn't get the option key to work. But what we ended up doing is just backing it once, and then it lets you choose the function or choose the class, and then it'll automatically import it for you up here. All right, so it's doing the work for you. Just sometimes you have to trick it to do the work. But in any case, this function, this pattern for this function to work with the onClick on the design side must be public, must be void, must take a view as a parameter. Those are the required aspects. You can name the parameter name whatever you want. You can name the function whatever you want. Make sense? If you haven't noticed, I use method and function interchangeably. Same thing. Historically, that was different. I think I told you that before. Historically, do you remember with like a language like Pascal, what the difference between a function and a procedure was? I probably only mentioned it once, so don't feel bad if you don't remember. So historically, in some of our older languages, we had they distinguished between a procedure and a function, even though they were both reusable chunks of code. A procedure did something but did not return a value, so its return type would have been void. A function did something but did return a value. Other than that, they were identical. Not a great reason to have two different ones. It was actually a language design thing back then where they created two different constructs, one for having the ability to send something back and another one not having that ability, so it was actually a simpler thing to write, but you had to write things twice. But now they fall under the category of a method, and methods always have a return type, just sometimes the return type is void, which means it doesn't return anything. Make sense? So call it whatever you want, it doesn't matter. They're functions, they're methods, they're reusable chunks of code. Okay, so and inside this, we're going to want it to go to that next screen. But for right now, just so we make sure all the connections are working, I'm just going to go ahead and say system.out.println blah. And then we'll go out to activity main and connect this button or connect this up to our button. So we'll click on our button, go to his onClick, hit the drop down. Had to hit it twice for it to repopulate. Now we see our on next page button pressed. Click that. Now we run our app, we should be able to click this button and we'll see down here in the Android monitor that that function got called. So we're just making sure that our plumbing is all hooked up. This is another good tactic to a good practice when you're programming. Don't spend too much time writing the logic until you know your button is calling the function. Make sense? A little bit of a test here. Takes an extra couple of seconds, but it'll save you time later on when you're frantically debugging all this code that's not working when the reality is it's just not calling your function. Make sense? So it'll save you some time. So I'll go ahead and run this. And we'll make sure that our function is getting called. I'm going to say use same selection for future launches. Notice that every single time we start a new project, if we already had the Android emulator open, it will ask us that the first time we try to launch it, because it's going to want to know, do you want to launch a different emulator? Are you writing this project for a different size screen? Or do you want to use the guy I've already noticed is running? So if you're going to test it on the same guy, just hit that checkbox. But that checkbox you're only agreeing to it for this open project, right? That way we don't have to keep hitting run in that every time we hit play. So we'll come in here, we have our button. I'll go ahead and I'll just hit that several times. We'll go into Android monitor and there's our blah. Okay, so it's connecting to the function. Good. Now we need to have a second page to go to. Can't go to a second page without another thing. So what's a page in our application called? Activity. So I'm going to need to create a new activity. So under this over here, I'll hit right click. I'm going to create new activity. And you have all sorts of activity types. Like I said before, I like empty activities. Later on, when you start making apps that have lots of different screens, you might, like for instance, if you have a screen that's going to have a map on it, you might choose navigation or you might, there's a map activity, isn't there? Oh, well, whatever. You might choose, or if you're making a login screen, you might choose a login activity. It'll automatically give you the couple of text boxes for username and password, that kind of stuff. But definitely early on, just make everything an empty activity and build out your interface. It'll be good practice. All right. So this guy's going to be an empty activity. Why don't we call this guy screen2? Something like that. All right, and it went ahead and it gave me a layout name of activity screen2. As long as I'm happy with that, it's good. Now notice this button here that says launcher activity. This is which activity should I first start when your app launches. Clearly, our main activity that we already had must be the current launcher activity, right? So don't check that checkbox unless you want to change that. All right, so we're going to leave that checkbox unchecked because we still want our main activity to be the original guy. All right, so just name it, leave everything else the same, go ahead and hit finish. It's going to give us a brand new screen2 activity here, and notice that it's also given us an activity screen2 design. And if we go under res, go under layout, see we have 2 files here now. Here's the new one it just created. Again, MVC. And if you look at our screen2 here, it's already set this guy's content view equal to that layout. Make sense? All right, so let's go into that layout real quick. Let's minimize this guy. And let's just put a, I don't know, a text view on here or something like that so it says something. So we know we're on screen 2. So again, I'll put my vertical linear layout in here. And then I will put a text view, which is just my label. And I don't need access to them right now, so I'm just going to change the text that's on this guy to say screen 2. And I'll go ahead and center that using the convenient way here. And we'll also bump the font up to be bigger, whatever. So if we're looking at this screen, we'll clearly know we're on screen 2. You can all agree with that? Okay. So now we need to go back to our main activity, and we need to train that function. We need to, instead of just printing out blah, or whatever I said, we need to tell it to launch this other activity. All right, and let's see, do I already have Keynote open? This is 250, right? Okay. All right, so we have something called an intent, okay, in Android. And an intent is, you know, something like we would say, we intend to perform an action. For example, in this case, we intend to show another activity. All right, so now intents come with a couple of different things. So with an intent, we have a destination where we're actually going to. We also have this thing called extras. Okay, we're going to see this here in a few minutes. So what extras does is this gives us the ability to pass information to, you know, along with the intent. So for instance, we can put in strings and integers, pass variables from one screen to another screen so they can get to the second screen. Make sense? So it's kind of like a suitcase. Okay, you get this intent, throw everything you need to take with you in there, shut it up, then you tell it to go, tell it to launch, and it takes you to the second screen. All right, so let's look at this. It's been a while since I wrote an intent. I might need to look at a reference for this, but I think I have at least 74% of it in my head. All right, so instead of system.out thing here, we're going to say intent I is equal to new intent. Now, we'll open up the And I'm gonna have to go ahead and, yeah, see, it just did that again. Is it from here? Oh, you have to be right after the intent, not in the function itself. I need to get the version of the one of them takes a context. Okay, yep. So I'm going to pass it, this is my context, the class I'm currently in, the activity I'm currently in. All right, and then I need to tell it where I'm going to. And I want to go to screen2.class. Here's where I currently am. Or this is actually probably a better way of saying this. This is my current situation. This is the information about my current situation. Where I am, current security things that came from the Android manifest, whether location services on, all this stuff. A bunch of information that we're not going to use, but come with the current context we're living in. All right? And then this is where I'm going. I want to go to screen2.class. So I want this intent to generate an instance of the screen2 activity and add it to my activity stack. So I will see it is whatever's at the top of the stack is what I'll see on the screen. Okay? And then I'll say I dot, is it fire? There's the extras. We'll look at that here in a few minutes. Oh, it's actually this dot show. I have to call the function and pass it the intent. I just have to look at the name of the function. Start. Start activity, and you pass it an intent. So the intent I'm going to give this guy is I. So when we click on our next page button, I'm going to create what I intend to do. I intend to leave the current context and go to an instance of screen2. And then I tell this activity to go ahead and start a new activity using this intent. Make sense? And that should take us to screen2. So go to page 2, click on that, there's my screen2. Now how do we get back? So on an iPhone application, if I wanted to get back to the first screen, I would have had to put a back button or something like that somewhere on here. Android has a built-in back button as part of the OS. I mean, some of it's used to be physical buttons. I don't know if any phone today has a physical back button. I think they're now all software-based. But regardless, I don't know that one's necessarily better than another. Maybe I think the Android built-in back button is better because now you don't have to clutter up the interface with a back button, but at the same time, now part of your screen is always taken up by having a back button. Pick your poison, I suppose. But Android has a back button built in, so we can hit back button. Now we're back to our first page. Make sense? Okay. So that's the dealio with that. All right, so now let's say that I wanted to, when I hit this button, I want it to take me to this page, but I want this screen2 thing to say something. I want it to have some information on it that I passed along. Kind of proof of concept that I'm able to throw a word or a number into my suitcase, into my intent, close it up, launch the next activity, and have that second guy receive that value. Okay, because we're going to need a way of passing information between screens in our application, right? It's going to be an important aspect. All right, so back here on this guy, why don't I go ahead and we're just going to say I dot put extra. And what this does is he creates a name value pair. So you give it the variable name and then the value you want it to have. So I'm going to put extra, and we're going to say my val. Here, what we call it my name. And then I'll pass it my name. Okay, and this guy can be a string, it could be an int, it could be any of our primitive types, or it could be strings, or it could be an object. Okay, so pass anything you want. Here's the name of that extra, and here's the value associated with it. If you noticed here, when I say I.put extra, notice there's a zillion kinds of these. So we can pass a Boolean array. We could pass a bundle, which let's not get into that. We could pass a byte array, a char array, a character sequence, which is kind of like a string, a double, a float, an int, a long, something that is parcelable. I've never actually worked with a parcelable, but parcelable would be an interface. That's more of a naming convention thing. Something that is able, A-B-L-E at the end, is typically an interface in Java. And we haven't talked about interfaces yet, but that's the kind of animal it is. So a whole bunch of stuff, right? A whole bunch of different kinds of things we can package in there. Okay, but we're just going to send this one string across. And so then on the other hand, so now we launch our activity. Nothing's changed here except we threw one value into our suitcase. On the second side here, though, I need to catch that value. All right, and I want to be able to put it somewhere. Well, let's just catch it first and prove that we have it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say string, call it the name, is equal to this dot, that's a get intent dot get extra, and I'm going to get a string extra, and the name of this guy was what I call it, my name. Gotta make sure that's why I named it over here. Yep, called it my name. So I want to grab the intent associated with this activity, that is the intent that launched him. I want to get a string extra from that guy. Which extra? The one whose variable name was my name. This will get that value. I'll go ahead and store it in a variable called the name, and then we'll print it out for right now. System.out.println the name. Go ahead and hit play. So now when I hit this button, it's going to go to the next screen, but before it goes there, it's going to package up a variable called my name that's equal to Mike, and the other screen on create is going to receive that intent, grab that value associated with my name, and then print what should be Mike out to the console. I ran that, so now we'll go down here to Android Monitor, and there is Mike right there. Make sense? Okay, and certainly we can go back in here to our first screen. We can throw an edit text in here, read in from the edit text, pass in whatever is in that edit text to the next screen and have him receive it, right? No different than what we've done before. So we can package anything we want and send it to the next screen. Now let me show you an alternate way of getting things between screens. I mentioned when we first introduced design patterns. And remind me, what's a design pattern? Yeah. So it's a proposed good solution to a common problem. The one we've been working with is something called MVC. All right. And I mentioned that there's some other popular ones. I said there's kind of like an infinite number of design patterns because you could just make up one, right? And write a research paper and call it whatever you want, and somebody can debunk it. And then you say, oh, yeah, you know, you're right. But you still get the publication. But another popular one, I think I probably mentioned out loud, but we haven't talked about it at all, is something called a singleton. The singleton design pattern. All right, so the idea of the singleton design pattern is it's a good idea to keep information that needs to be shared among, let's call it more than one object in a single place. I'm going to say more than one other object in a single place. So this would be kind of an example is, let's say we had one car and we were sharing it with all of us in here. So we're all sharing a car. Not all that efficient, but that's what we're going to do. All right. So maybe we decide we're going to keep the keys of the car in this top drawer over here. So when you need to use the car, you would come and check the top drawer. If the keys are there, you can use the car. If the keys aren't there, then the car is in use or something like that. But point is, the important thing about this is that you have a single place to go to get the keys. Okay, and in maybe in since we don't often delete our values, if you grab the keys to the car, now the keys are gone. But maybe in the Java sense, you go to get the keys. When you take it, you're getting a copy of the keys, so the keys are still there if somebody else needs them. They'll just have a little trouble with the car because the car will be gone. But in any case, that's the idea of the Singleton design pattern. So we're going to quickly use this for one screen, but then we're going to show you how it would work for a second screen. Actually, let's do, based on time, we have time to do a second screen. So I'm actually going to create another activity called screen 3. So I'm going to say new activity. Notice here that it actually has the ability to create a singleton. I hate the way they make their singleton, so I'm going to show you my own way of doing it. So I'm going to make an activity. It's going to be an empty activity. And we'll call this guy screen 3. Okay. And then we'll go back into our main activity. And I'm going to give myself another button here. Actually, while I'm at it, why don't I show you the use of this variable here, this variable v, in case you wanted to use it in another scenario. So we'll go to activity main, and I'm going to name this button page 2 button. And then I'm going to create a copy of this button. And we're going to name this guy page 3 button. I've named them easy to remember names because now I need programmatic access to them. And you're going to see why here in a minute. All right, and we're going to put the text on this button. Go to page 3. All right, I'll go back into my main activity. Now I'm going to create a couple of fields for this class. We really, well, for our past project, when we were always grabbing the edit text every single time we clicked the button, would have made more sense to do it the way I'm doing it here, but it still worked. So I'm going to create a couple of private variables. So I'm going to create a private button. Go ahead and import button. And we're going to call this guy screen 1 button, private button, screen 2 button. And then inside of onCreate, I'll go ahead and hook those buttons up. So I'll say this dot screen 1 button is equal to the button version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot what did I call it? Button page 2 button. Except that should be page 1 button. And just for the sake of consistency, let's name this page 1, page 2. Actually, let me show you something else here real quick. So I'm going to take, let's say I was using this variable in a whole bunch of places in my code. I can highlight it here. I can right click on it. And there should be a thing called Refactor somewhere in here. Oh, there we go. Now let's choose rename. I'm going to call this page 1 button. See how it changes it everywhere else in my program? So that's a convenient way of, if you decide to change a variable name, You can change it where you created it, and it will update it every place else in the program, so you don't have to go and find the 30 places you had it. Okay, so refactoring is a software engineering term. All right, so I'll do the same thing here. Actually, I don't need to refactor this one because I haven't used it in another place yet. That's page 2 button. Oh, I named them poorly anyways. Page 2, page 3 buttons, right? Then we'll say this dot page 3 button is equal to the button version of this dot find view by ID r dot ID dot page 3 button. So now I have access to those 2 buttons, programmatic access to those 2 buttons. Now down here, the view that calls this function will be, since I'm going to connect this to the on-click for both of those buttons, is going to be one of those 2 buttons. So I'm going to say if v is equal to this dot page 2 button, then do this stuff. And then just in case I was going to put more buttons in here, I can say else if v is equal to this dot page 3 button, then do the same thing but go to screen 3 class. Now I have a single function that I'm going to have both of my buttons call. But when the page 2 button calls the function, he will pass himself in as the view that called this guy. And then I'll ask, was the view who called me the page 2 button? If it was, go to screen 2. Otherwise, if it was the page 3 button, go to screen 3. Make sense? So we'll go over to our activity main guy here. On this button, because I copied him from the original one, he already has his on-click set. So it already goes to the right place. I wonder if it actually will work right. I think it will. I don't think I need to do anything. Yeah. All right, and that's going to go to page 3, and then let me go to my screen 3 guy here, and let's just throw a layout in there real quick. So we'll give him a vertical layout, and then we'll throw a text view in there. And we'll have this guy say screen 3. And we'll center it, and we'll make it bigger. So there's our screen 3. Okay, so that guy should be set. So now I go ahead and launch this, and now my button should take me to 2 separate places, right? Go to page 2, takes me to screen 2. Go to page 3, takes me to screen 3. There's an example of using one function for the on-click of 2 separate or even more than 2 buttons. And depending who was the button that called that function, I can do different things. All right, so does that make sense? The purpose of this view v now, that tells us who called this function. Okay, so now if I want to pass to both of these screens the same variable, my name, I can package it with the suitcase for both of those, right? Or what I can do is I can create something called a singleton, which is a single global object that has a bunch of static fields in it that allows me to store a piece of information I want to share among multiple screens. So I'm going to go ahead underneath here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to create a new Java class. And I like naming my singletons. I just name it core. I don't know, it's more of just something I've always done. So I'm going to call this guy core. And then inside here, I'm going to have a public static string my name. All right. And he's static, so he's going to be owned by the class, and he only exists one time. So here in my activity main, on create, I could do wherever I want, but on create, I'm going to go ahead and say core.myname is equal to Mike. So I've set that global variable. Now I don't need to put these extras in here. Instead, for instance, in screen 2, rather than, well, here, I'm actually just going to get rid of this line. Core.myname is what I'll print out there. Make sense? So I'm grabbing it from that global variable. I didn't have to package it with the intent. I didn't have to extract it from the intent. It's just sitting up there. No matter what screen I'm on, I can go ahead and grab that guy. So we'll go ahead and run this. And I'll go to screen 2 and you'll see this print out. So there's screen 2. There's our Android monitor. There's our name. All right, so that's how we can use a singleton to share data between two screens. And we'll work with this more next class. I know I kind of rushed through this a little bit. But rather than packaging it in the intent, I threw it inside of this one global variable. I made it a static field, therefore I access it using the name of the class in which the field was defined. So I said core.myname. Now, the advantage of using a singleton like this is it was really convenient, right? So we might, I mean, wouldn't you say it's kind of inconvenient to throw things into an intent and then unpackage them from the intent on the other end? That might get old pretty quick. But notice in the on the keynote slide, I mentioned that this guy makes sense when you want to share something across more than one other screen. Because realistically speaking, if you kind of become a singleton junkie and you just throw everything up in this global variable, yes, it's convenient. And for maybe small projects, that's okay. You know, it's maybe not the end of the world. But in a larger project, you want to use the singleton when it makes sense to use the singleton, because if you're always throwing everything up there, what you're going to end up having is this gigantic singleton with 4,000 variables in it that are going to be kind of hard to keep straight. So as a general rule, if you only need to get information from one screen to one other screen, maybe even two other screens, go ahead and use the intent. That way, those screens are loosely coupled. They're only related to each other, and they're not having to grab from some global basket. But if you need a piece of information, so for instance, maybe the username of whoever's currently logged into the application, that might be something that every screen in the application needs to have. Maybe that's something you would throw inside of a singleton. So any screen in the application that they needed to grab the username or the user ID or something like that for doing a database query, they could grab it conveniently without having to rely on us having passed it to that particular intent. That makes sense? Okay, so no homework for the weekend because I'm kind of at a middle point here. Several of you will be at the hackathon. If not, the homework assignment for the alternative assignment, which is worth 3 homework assignments, by the way. So you don't want to blow that one off if you're going to do the alternate assignment, because that paper is, if you get a 0 on that, that's 0 on 3 homework assignments. Okay? So I will see everybody on, well, hopefully I'll see most of you on Saturday. If you have not heard from your team lead yet, make sure you reach out so you guys can start brainstorming project ideas.
Is my speed okay?